Well, I'm up, and it was a night sleep, but I'm up. And the first thing I want to discuss today is standings. We're roughly halfway through the season, and the awkward part is that St. Louis has played 42 games. San Jose's played 37. There's a 5 game in hand issue with these ones, but it gives you a good sign here of which teams should probably look to rebuild and which ones shouldn't. I would think that any team that's more than 10 points out of the playoffs right now, it's probably done. You should probably pack it up and figure out what you can get for assets at the trade deadline. Right now, Tampa's first in their division, 60 points. Washington's first in their division with 53. As the lower seed of the two, they would play the Rangers if the playoffs started today, whereas Tampa would play Carolina. Now, the interesting thing is TSN has Carolina in the playoffs and the Islanders out. The Islanders have more regulation or overtime wins, but Carolina has a game in hand, so it really depends. Personally, I still think that's the Islanders' spot because they have more regulation and overtime wins than do the Carolina Hurricanes. So, for sake of argument, I'd say Islanders versus Tampa in the first round, Washington versus Rangers, Jersey versus Columbus, Toronto versus Boston. Now, this doesn't tell you that certain teams are dropping and certain teams are rising. Certainly, Columbus has had its issues, but they're still in position to finish with about a 100-point season and make the playoffs. Pittsburgh's sitting 1 point out, but they've played 2 more games than Carolina, 1 more game than the Islanders. The thing is, of course, since they're division rivals, they should still have games left against them. I say should because there's some weird scheduling going on where some division rivals are already done with each other. We've seen home and home between Western and Eastern foes where they play both games that they're supposed to play all season within a week. So I don't know, maybe Pittsburgh's already done with Carolina. Maybe Pittsburgh's already done with the Islanders. Philly here with 40 points, 39 games played. So they're 4 points out, same amount of games played as Carolina. They are not out of it. Florida's 5 points out. Florida has to get past Philly, Pittsburgh, Islanders, and Carolina. This is where the trick comes in. Your issue isn't just looking and going, we're X amount of points out. You're also X amount of teams out. So for Florida right now, they are 4 teams out of the playoffs and 5 points out. Detroit now sitting 7 points out and 5 teams out of the playoffs. Montreal 36 points, they're 8 points out of the playoffs. Carolina's got a game in hand against them. Montreal's definitely in a position where they're going to have to sell off some assets. I'm going to discuss Pacioretty later because that appears to be the big gun that they're talking about trading away, and we'll see how that turns out for them. The Senators are out. I don't see the Senators getting in, and obviously Buffalo is way below that line. They're 15 points out of the playoffs, whereas Ottawa sits 12 points out of the playoffs. Ottawa has 2 games in hand on Carolina, but really, since you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams to get past to get into the playoffs, this is why when I see headlines on TSN or Sportsnet and I see Senators lose a key game, it's like, no, they're key games when you're 3 or 4 points out, not when you're 12 points out. 12 points out, you're done. Their days of key games, to them now the key game is going to be how far down can they go. Overall right now, Arizona has that by 6 points over Buffalo in terms of having the worst record in the league. And then Ottawa's third. Look out, though. Vancouver's getting close. Montreal's currently fourth. Fifth right now would be Vancouver because Detroit has games in hand. Edmonton would be sixth. Seventh would be Detroit. There's some surprises in those top 7 in terms of likelihood of getting the number 1 draft pick. And it's good for... The only thing that Pierre Dorian got right is that draft pick was lockout protected, because at the time the trade was made, there was a feeling that maybe Ottawa was nearly a contender, and certainly if Pierre Dorian felt that way, he could have just said, we'll trade this year's first-round draft pick. You could have a Tyler Seguin situation here if he'd done that. So at least he did that right. Out west, the best team in the West is Vegas. 38 games, 56 points. They're ahead of Winnipeg by 3 points with 3 games in hand, which is insane. And they're 4 points ahead of St. Louis with 4 games in hand. This is the thing. Vegas has had a very nice schedule, and they've built up a nice cushion. They've got all these games in hand as well. And they're a relatively healthy team. meaning that in the second half, they currently have an 11-point cushion over a team that would actually knock them out of the playoffs. Vegas could play horribly in the second half of the season and still get at least home ice advantage because they're 10 points ahead of third place in their division, which is when they'd lose home ice advantage. But back to the Central. You've got Winnipeg with 53 points, St. Louis with 52. Winnipeg has a game in hand on them. And here are the Predators who have games in hand on people, and they're at 51. The Predators have started not a slide as much as they're just in a bit of a slump. I do expect them to pull out of it. Then they better, because Dallas is here at 47 points, 41 games, and Dallas could get into one of those top three spots. Absolutely. 4 points back of Nashville, 5 points back, 6 points back. One of them has an issue and goes into a 5 or 6 game skid, which St. Louis is just coming out of. They've won their last 2. They're 4-6 in their last 10, though. So it's half full or half empty if you're a St. Louis fan. LA sits with 53 points in 40 games. LA would be good enough for first place in the Central, but because they're in the same division as the Vegas Golden Knights, they're not in first place. I was reading an article this morning on Vegas, on the hockey news from before the season started, where they were talking about top 10 trade deadline targets, and they said all of the pending unrestricted free agents from Vegas will be moved to a contender. The talent-starved Vegas Golden Knights will be just looking to add prospects and draft picks, and I thought, wow, what a difference a couple of months makes. The only one that they thought that the Vegas would be looking to sign long-term might be Marchessault. And that was it. They said James Neal, might get onto a 25 goal pace with Vegas. Should fetch a second rounder, maybe a first if he's doing really well. Yeah, I think if you traded James Neal for a second rounder right now, well, first off, Vegas would somehow win the trade anyway. Somehow, the reincarnation of Wayne Gretzky would be the second round draft pick they'd get. Magic, because Vegas, and for Vegas reasons, they are a verb. Look it up. But really, it's astonishing, and I mention it a lot because this is insane. They are sitting right now 4 points behind the first place team in the NHL with a game in hand. And it's not that Tampa's playing badly, it's just Vegas doesn't lose for Vegas reasons. Third place in the division, 46 points in 37 games, are the Sharks. The Sharks are 7 points back of LA, but they have 3 games in hand. And they've been playing very, very well. San Jose has been playing extremely, extremely well. In those wildcard spots are Dallas and Anaheim. I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler here now. We're up to about the halfway mark of the season, and I'm going to do a halfway mark grades of teams. The fact that Anaheim's in the playoffs right now, after all of the injury issues and after all of those overtime losses, which have certainly helped get them into this position, they have 8 points from that. Without those 8 points, if they'd lost those 8 in regulation, they're down in this area, and we're talking about they're going to have to skip over how many teams to get to the playoffs. But however they did it, Anaheim's in the playoffs, and for me, that's a grade A that they're in there. They would have to play Vegas in the first round. LA would play San Jose. The number 1 rated wildcard team, Dallas, would play Winnipeg in what would be an amazing series. And St. Louis would play Nashville in what would be an amazing series. So again, we'd be looking at, in this matchup between St. Louis and Nashville, 2 of the best teams in the West going at it, and one of them having to be out in the first round. And everybody's going to be up in arms because, oh no, a great team's going to be out in the first round. Yeah, you've got 31 teams in the league, and only 8 of them make the second round. Odds are one of the better teams in the league's going out in the first round anyways. We're just at that point now and I think we should celebrate it more than being appalled by it. When it was a 21-team league and 16 teams made the playoffs, yeah, if you didn't get to the second round, it was kind of a failure. But we are at that point, and soon it'll be 32 teams, likely with the addition of Seattle. And why not? Why not celebrate what these teams have done and celebrate the fact that 2 really good teams are going to meet up in the first round? I don't get it. But outside the playoffs, Minnesota's still in a position to say something about it. They've got a game in hand and they're a point back. Colorado is now 3 points out of the playoffs with 2 games in hand on the Ducks. Chicago has now fallen behind Colorado, though they have games in hand as well. They have 3 games in hand. They're 4 points out. This is starting to become an issue for the Flames. The Flames are now behind Colorado. They've played more games than Chicago, so the standings has them behind them. They have to pass 4 teams to get to the playoffs. 4 points out, yes. Then you're looking at the Oilers and the Canucks are both 9 points out. The Canucks, I think, know they're done. I think there's a lot of Oilers who still feel like, I'm talking about players on the ice and members of management, who still think this can be salvaged. And that Edmonton can somehow make up that 9-point gap they've got with Anaheim. I have my doubts, but I can understand why there's still optimism because they have a decent roster, and it does kind of look like maybe with the right amount of prodding they can get things going, but it is going to be really tough. They'd have to win, I would say, 27 out of 42 games in order to make the playoffs, because that'd be, 54 points? Probably about 57. That'd probably end up with them about 94 points. Anaheim's on pace for 92, and Anaheim's getting better. So even by saying, 27 out of 42 games, that's probably low. And you'd have to look at the Oilers and say, here's why I think they're going to win 27 out of 42 games. It's the math doesn't look good for Edmonton right now. And of course, Arizona is currently 23 points out of the playoffs. They are 14 points behind the Canucks. They are 6 points behind Buffalo. And they're not, this is not a tank job. It's not like John Chayka came into this season saying, hey, we're going to be the worst team in the league. This was supposed to be a getting better season. And this is why when there's a lot of people who say give Chayka some time, I look at this and I say, I don't know, man. I don't know how much time you can give to a GM who's got a team, who inherited a team that wasn't great and has made them arguably much worse. Much, much worse. And it'll be interesting to see what Arizona's Brain Trust does at the end of the year and what the NHL does with this. This has to be fixed. It has to be fixed both in terms of they have to start getting better to attract more attention, and they have to be in a better place than Glendale to get that attention. They're not leaving Arizona, but it's a matter of where they go. Do they go back to Phoenix? Is something done somewhere else in Arizona to get them more fans, more attendance? But as long as they're this historically bad, they're on pace for 46 points. We've all talked about how horrible a season it was for these guys with 48. And by the way, Colorado's 5 points short of that 48-point mark. That's pretty impressive. For this team to be worse than that one, and they already weren't drawing, whereas Denver will draw. Even when the team's not very good, Denver will draw fans more than Arizona. This has to be fixed. And I guarantee you that Bettman and Daly are sitting down and discussing, what do we do with Arizona? We're not leaving Arizona, but what are we going to do with Arizona? How do we fix this? And it's not just going to be a matter of moving the team to a new arena, because you can put perfume on the pig, but it's still a pig. And this has to be fixed. Absolutely has to be fixed. The NHL has intervened with Arizona to save them before. Somebody has to save Arizona from themselves. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And I just figured it would be a good time to look at the standings, look at who's where, and which teams realistically should look at rebuilding. One last thing here. In my eyes, anyways, teams below this line probably should think about next year. Those 7 teams should think about next year. Florida, it's close. Florida's winning streak was fun. If James Reimer's going to be out for an extended period, if Luongo's not going to be back for an extended period, then that line goes up above Florida. Because even though they're only 5 points out, without Luongo or Reimer, they're not Vegas. They're not going to rattle off 8 or 9 wins in a row. So, nobody's Vegas. Let me know what you guys think. I'll talk to you again soon.